Alright, so we have here a video from Brightside titled, Who Ruled Earth Before the Dinosaurs? It sounds like it's an educational video about Paleozoic life, but the thumbnail is like a mega dinosaur thumbnail of some sort of versus fight. I'm going to be deducting a point for that thumbnail. I'm going to be rating this video on a scale from 1 to 20. I'm giving it 20 points now, but deducting 1 point for every ridiculous claim Brightside makes. I love Paleozoic life, so let's get into it.
Meganeuropsis was a giant dragonfly that lived on our planet almost 300 million years ago.
It is not a dragonfly, it's a griffin fly. It is an Arthropleura like dragonflies, but it's not the same thing.
It was about the size of a modern-day falcon, with a wingspan as long as your leg.
Its wings would have been like a falcon, but its weight would have been a little less, much less than a falcon. It's an insect, no bones, just an exoskeleton.
It had long and sharp claws that it used to catch food and for protection. They could even grab small animals and carry them through the air.
Alright, that's a mammal, and mammals would not appear, it's some sort of rodent, and mammals would not appear until almost 100 million years after Meganeuropsis. And also, Meganeuropsis did not use its claws for protection. It would have just flown away if a Dimetrodon came after it.
Their speed and maneuverability made them formidable hunters. Meganeuropsis is the most giant insect ever found on Earth. Scientists believe it might have reached this colossal size because there used to be more oxygen in the air. There were other
Not Meganeuropsis. Meganeuropsis lived after the Carboniferous rainforest collapse, meaning there wouldn't have been that much oxygen in the air. And it probably grew so large because there were no flying tetrapods to compete with it. Like the Coelurosaurus and gliding reptiles would come later.
Gigantic insects that lived before the dinosaurs, too. Some ancient ants could grow to the size of a hummingbird. And if that wasn't scary enough, they could also spit acid, like something out of a movie. These ants lived in large colonies, and their anthills were several times bigger than the ones we see today, and could resemble a bear's den.
Alright, you're referring to Titanomerma, which is the largest ant of all time. But you're missing one key factor. It lived after the non-avian dinosaurs, and not before. It lived in the Eocene of Germany and Wyoming. So it should not be in this video.
This thing is an Arthropleura, an ancient ancestor of the giant millipede.
It's not an ancestor of millipedes. It's a myriapod like millipedes, but it is not the ancestor of anything today.
This monster dwarfed the last two animals.
And it's not a monster. It's an awesome animal, very spectacular, and would have been very cool to witness.
Growing to the length of a car. It lived in rainforests, and it could move at great speed.
You're showing some sort of dense forest, not a rainforest.
Imagine being chased by one of these. Fortunately, Arthropleura weren't carnivores like today's centipedes. They only ate plants.
Only ate plants. First of all, modern millipedes are herbivores as well, so it's not that crazy. And it didn't just eat plants, it ate seeds and spores as well. And besides, what do you mean by only ate plants? Like that's, it only eats plants, it's not interesting anymore. That's the kind of vibe I'm getting here.
Another reason the insects grew so big back then is that there was less direct competition. They could evolve and grow without being eaten by more successful animals.
True and false. Yes, that's one of the reasons, because they could grow large because there was no large tetrapods to eat them. However, there is no animal more successful than an insect. The arthropod, all the bugs, that phylum is more numerous than any other phyla of animals. So, I'm deducting 2 points for that ridiculous claim. Nothing is more successful than the insects.
Brontoscorpio lived about 400 million years ago and could reach 3 feet in length.
Possibly even longer than that. And also, you're showing that thing looks a little bit too stocky for Brontoscorpio. And also, it lived 416 to 412.3 million years ago.
That's 15 times longer than modern scorpions. And unlike modern ones, it had not 2, but 4 claws.
All we have is one pincer of Brontoscorpio. There's no evidence it had 4 pincers.
This amazing creature could also breathe on land and underwater. That's because it had both gills and lungs.
It did not have lungs. Arthropods on land breathe through special veins or holes in their exoskeleton. They don't have lungs. Those are muscles that tetrapods use to breathe, or vertebrates. But yes, they could breathe on both land and water.
It's believed that these guys were some of the first to evolve and change their habitat from water to land.
They were semi-aquatic. They did not change their habitat from water to land. Besides, small arthropods from before the Brontoscorpio came on land earlier.
Now, on to a far stranger marine animal, Anomalocaris. It's thought to be the very first predator to live on our planet.
It's one of the first apex predators, but not the first predator.
It was half the length of a human.
It's 1.25 feet long. It is not half the length of a human. Omnidens would have been, but not Anomalocaris.
Their eyes had color vision, and they were likely the most advanced of any living organism, 500 million years ago.
No, it was not. Size is not everything. Besides, Omnidens was bigger. And also Waxwilla, trilobites, lobopodians like Hallucidenia. There were many other very bizarre, Opabenia. There were many other very bizarre and interesting animals that lived in the Cambrian. Just because they were smaller doesn't mean they're less advanced or interesting.
They used their sharp claws and mouth parts for hunting trilobites, crabs,
They had segmented frontal appendages, not claws.
and sea scorpions.
And they did not eat any of those 3 creatures. Sea scorpions, scorpions, and crabs came after Anomalocaris, long after. The evidence points that it was some sort of open water predator, hunting soft-bodied organisms in the open water. Omnidens probably ate the armored prey on the ocean floor, like trilobites.
It's possible that Anomalocaris was what eventually pushed crabs and scorpions onto the land. They might not look very similar, but Anomalocaris was also an ancient ancestor of modern crabs.
Alright, there was much wrong here. It did not push animals onto land. It went extinct before arthropods began migrating onto the land. And also, it is very much not the ancestor of crabs. It's an evolutionary dead end. It's a dinocaridid. It's a radiodont. But the dinocaridids only lived from the Cambrian to the Middle Devonian. They have no ancestors alive today. I mean, no descendants. This video is skewing my brain.
Dunkleosteus was an enormous ancient fish. These guys were half the length of a school bus and weighed the same as a small car.
That's if you're using outdated estimates. It's not 33 feet long. That's an outdated estimate. More likely 11 to 13 feet long, based on more recent studies.
They had no teeth, but evolved to use the bone plates on their jaws as a replacement, leading to their crazy appearance. This allowed them to have the biting power of a modern Mississippi alligator.
Probably much less than that. 7,495 newtons in the higher range.
Most impressively, it could close its jaw multiple times in less than a second. This created a powerful flow of water right into its mouth. Smaller fish would get caught in the current and pulled right into a Dunkleosteus' mouth.
That's speculative.
Their skull was heavily protected by bony armor. It was like it was wearing a helmet. This protected it from almost any strikes and made it the apex predator of its time. Akmonistion is the ancestor of all sharks in existence.
What? It is not the ancestor of all sharks in existence. It's a chondrichthyes, a cartilaginous fish, just like sharks, but it's a holocephalian. Its closest living relative today would have been the ghost sharks, I believe they're called, but they're not actually sharks. And this is not a shark, and it was not the ancestor of sharks.
Living around 340 million years ago. No one knows why, but in addition to the usual shark fin, it had something that looked like an anvil on its back. Another feature of the Anomalocaris was a massive spike on the underside of its body.
Alright, so that dorsal fin is called a spine brush complex. Those are those weird spines. And also, what are you talking about? There's no spike on the other side of its body.
It was very sharp and covered with many teeth.
Alright, it did not have a spike on the other side of its body, covered in teeth. It had a very strange dorsal fin called a spine brush complex. The weird patches of what look like teeth, and those were probably for display or intimidation. But it did not. What are you babbling about? A spike on the other side of its body with teeth on it.
Tiktaalik were some of the first animals to set foot on land.
What?
It had gills and scales, like a fish, but it also had some of the features of land animals.
That's because it was a fish. It was a sarcopterygian, which are the lobe-finned fish. And what is this? This guy took a Komodo dragon and stuck fish scales on it. Tiktaalik did not look anything like this. It did not have advanced legs like that. It would have powerful limbs for dragging itself on land, but oh my goodness.
It looked a bit like a cross between a fish and a lizard.
It did not look like a cross between a fish and a lizard. Maybe a fish and a salamander, but
Its front and back fins began to turn into limbs, so it could crawl along shorelines. And Tiktaalik only had fins. Yes, it could crawl on land, but it did not have advanced legs like a tetrapod. Developed lungs as it spent more time out of the water. This weird fish may be the ancestor of pretty much every modern land animal today, including us.
Alright, no it is not. Its relatives may be the ancestors of land vertebrates today. But there are many land animals today that are like invertebrates, like the arthropods and like worms and stuff. Those are definitely not the descendants of Tiktaalik.
Back to land. This is a Dimetrodon. It looks like a lizard, but it's actually a synapsid, a close relative of mammals.
Because mammals are synapsids.
It was the size of an alligator and had a giant sail on its back. Scientists...
The largest species, like Dimetrodon grandis, were the size of alligators. But smaller species, like Dimetrodon teutonus, would have been much smaller than that, like the size of a Gila monster, I'd say.
Aren't certain, but it's believed that the Dimetrodon used this sail to get heat from the environment faster. It also helped them
or for display.
Camouflage themselves in the tall grass.
How is a long sail gonna camouflage you in the tall grass? And grass did not exist in the early Permian.
These guys are often confused with dinosaurs, but they disappeared 40 million years before the first dinosaurs appeared. Over time, synapsids
Yes, you're right here, they're not dinosaurs.
evolved into full-fledged mammals.
Well, mammals are still synapsids. No, unless you're a paraphyletic or polyphyletic group, no animal can change what group it is. Mammals will always be synapsids.
And if we go further down this chain, we'll find out that humans evolved from these guys too.
Not from Dimetrodon, from the cynodonts, other therapsids and the synapsids, but not from Dimetrodon.
Dinocephalians. The name of these guys literally translates to scary-headed. This is because, in the process of evolution, their skulls became much thicker. These creatures were usually 19 feet long and weighed...
Alright, the Dinocephalians are a large group of animals. Don't stop referring to them like they're just one single animal.
the same as a car. Some of them had long fangs like a saber-toothed tiger.
A saber-toothed tiger? Really?
But these giant lizards were herbivores. That doesn't
Alright, so some of the Dinocephalians were herbivores, like the Anomalocaris, the Styracocephalids, and the Tapinocephalids, like moth chops. Yes, those were herbivores, but some, like the Ankylosaurs and the Titanosuchids, were carnivores. Once again, this is a large, very diverse group of animals. Stop referring to them like it's just a single animal.
mean that they were completely peaceful and docile, though. Scientists believe they fought.
Of course, because just because you're herbivores do not mean you're peaceful and docile.
Within their species. They smashed their heavy foreheads into each other, like rams do now.
Alright, that's speculative, and yes, maybe the Anomalocaris and the moth chops, those probably did that. For like fighting for mates. But yeah, pretty much every species has fighting within itself.
Dinocephalians existed at a time when all our continents were still connected in a supercontinent called Pangaea. Gorgonopsia looked a little like Dinocephalians, only these guys were carnivores.
Some Dinocephalians were carnivores too. In fact, Ankylosaurs were much larger than any Gorgonopsid.
Were about the size of a wolf, but they spent a lot of time in water too. They usually
Alright, some of them were the size of wolves, but the largest were like the size of a Smilodon, like the Inostrancevia and Rubigia.
lived on coastlines and could dive into the sea looking for food.
Alright, that is just completely speculative. There's no evidence supporting that. I don't know of any evidence supporting that. -1 point.
They were also the first predators that could run fast.
They were not the first predators that could run fast. Many of the Dinocephalians from before the Gorgonopsids could run fast, and so could, like, Dimetrodon could probably run fast enough.
This is one reason why Gorgonopsia ruled the world about 265 million years ago.
Well, no, the carnivorous Ankylosaurs also, dominated the world about that long ago. The Gorgonopsids probably ruled about 254 to 252 million years ago. Or like when the large carnivorous Ankylosaurs weren't there.
Later, these species mysteriously disappeared, leaving the dinosaurs to dominate the Earth. The cause...
Alright, so no, they disappeared, but it took like over 40 million years for the dinosaurs to dominate the Earth. Many Dicynodonts, carnivorous land crocs, the dinosaurs didn't just immediately take over the world. Besides, like T-Rex and the large sauropods, there's more time between T-Rex and Gorgonopsids than there is between T-Rex and humans. It would take a very long time for dinosaurs like those to appear.
The mass extinction about 240 million years ago is unknown, but the second event that
about 252 million years ago
caused the extinction of 95% of all living organisms on Earth was a giant meteorite. The oldest tree remains.
Alright, so that meteorite, that's a disproven theory. Probably not likely. It was more likely that there were megavolcanoes that release massive amounts of carbon dioxide and toxic chemicals into the atmosphere, basically burning Earth alive.
Are 385 million years old. Archaeologists found them inside a rock, where there were traces of the roots of many species of trees. These ancient trees evolved and began to turn the carbon dioxide in the air into oxygen. Gradually, they created the atmosphere we have now. This is the oldest winged insect in the world, Rhyniognathus. It's about 400 million years old, and there's still debate about the way it lived. Supposedly, it fed on plants, but it also might have eaten other animals.
Alright, well, if its arc survival evolved, this is the largest one, bigger than a Rex. But, yeah, at least your facts about the Rhyniognathus are okay.
The oldest species of millipede is Pneumodesmus pneumani. It may have been the first living organism to breathe on the barren Earth around 400 million years ago.
No, the plants lived on Earth first, and they breathed before Pneumodesmus.
This little guy was only as long as a seed, but we only have one fossil, so they might have grown a bit bigger. Pneumodesmus might be a distant relative of all the millipedes and centipedes that exist today.
Because it was.
The farther we go back in time, the more bizarre the living organisms look. 480 million years ago, Arthropleura coasted through the ocean.
That is an Opabenia, not an Arthropleura.
For its time, it was the largest animal on the planet, reaching 6.6 feet in length.
Possibly even larger than that. But once again, this is not a Arthropleura.
Fortunately for other sea creatures, it wasn't a scary hunter. It ate the same way
a scary hunter, really?
That the blue whale does today, swallowing loads of water so it could catch all the tiny things living in it.
Yes, that's true.
Dickinsonia lived 500...
Which is why you should not put an Opabenia as an Arthropleura. Opabenia had a long, weird proboscis with its mouth at the end. But Arthropleura looked much more bizarre than that. I cannot describe it. I'll put a picture of it up.
50 million years ago. These floating ovals varied a lot in size. Some could be the size of a fingernail, while other species were as big as a kitchen plate. The largest Dickinsonia may have been as wide as a stingray. These animals are so primitive that they didn't even have a skeleton.
So primitive that they didn't even have a skeleton. There are many advanced animals today without skeletons. Like the insects, the cephalopods, the other mollusks. Just because it doesn't have a skeleton does not mean it's primitive.
Some scientists thought it wasn't even an animal, but a fungus. But that was later disproven. Charnia was another animal that scientists originally thought was a plant. They believed that it was just the leaf of something like a fern. They realized that it was an animal when it was found that Charnia lived deep underwater, where photosynthesis is impossible.
Photosynthesis is possible underwater if you live in the shallow waters, which it thing probably did.
These guys swam near the bottom of the sea and fed on nutrients from...
They did not swim. They were anchored to the bottom of the sea. What do you kill Charnia? If it took itself off at the bottom of the sea, it would die.
The water. Instead of a traditional digestive system, these things had filters. They ran water through them to catch food in it, like the Arthropleura. The first
That's not Arthropleura. That is Opabenia.
Living organism is thought to have appeared about 4.2 billion years ago. When the oceans first formed, they were filled with things needed for...
When the ocean first formed, they were not palm trees.
...life to exist. Under high temperatures, this matter began to interact and join together, forming the first living organism. This is why we look for planets with liquid water. We know life on Earth started with water, so many people believe that water is the most important factor in the origin of life.
That's all just abiogenesis, which I don't really know much about. Alright, so this video was very terrible, to say the least. The worst part about it is that Paleozoic life is not that well known. So when he goes spewing garbage facts, like facts, quote, people who watch the video are just gonna think it's true because they don't know any better, because this topic is not widespread. So yeah, I guess there were some parts he got right, but he did just make up dumb facts out of nowhere. But yeah, here's the overall score. I'll see you next time with more content on dinosaurs and other prehistoric animals.